Hi, everybody. We're going to do something a little unique right now for the myShakespeare team. We're going to have something called an actor chat.
Yes.
Essentially, this play, Taming of the Shrew, has been quite controversial. And so we just wanted to take a moment to talk with our actors, Adrianna Mitchell and Alan Teddard, about how they approach the work and what they think of the play. Welcome.
Good to be here.
Hi.
So my first question is, I wanted to know how you first encountered Taming of the Shrew. Did you read it or did you see it, and what was your reaction?
My first encounter with Taming of the Shrew was doing the play. We did a flipped, like a gender-flipped version of it. So all the women played all the male characters, and I played Petruchio. So I had a completely different vantage point in terms of how I was matriculating through the play. So like Kate didn't impact me in the same way because I was in a different part, I was in a totally different storyline. But I think even in the end, I think we tried to solve the end of the play by gender flipping it, but at the end you still have a man dressed up as a woman berating other women.
Yes.
So we still had a problem towards the end of the play that we had to solve. So, and it was interesting that I've only experienced his play directed by men too. Mm-hmm. So that's been an interesting conversation about what's going on in the room and how we want to solve the problem of the play. And I think people approach the play trying to solve it or have a commentary on it. So that was my first encounter.
My first encounter with this play was I played Hortensio in undergraduate. That's the answer.
Did you like it? Did you have a feeling about it?
Yeah, I did not like the play then. I very, very much like it now. Hortensio's role in this play is quite difficult to do, but separate from all of that personal stuff. The message of the play is it's one dependent on the reader and where they are, but also it's difficult to grapple with if you aren't prepared to have an opinion about it.
Yes.
And I wasn't as an undergraduate. I read the play for truth, and I considered that Shakespeare just wrote a very angry set of people that just happened to go about bashing into each other until one of them decided that was enough. And then they got to speak at the end of the play. And that was pretty much what I saw. I didn't learn much about myself reading it then, but you do eventually.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. Yeah.
So, Alan, when you were doing this as an undergraduate, was the ending of the play set up in that context as a problem to be solved, as Adrianna was saying?
Right, good question. In Troth, we tried to make it a farce. So we played everything for true. And when Kate did her speech at the end, she meant all of those things. But the whole point of the play, we maintained the framing device of Sly and the hostess. And all of that was just to say, here is a version of living, don't do this version. Like farces, that's what you do. So that's what we did. And you consider that correct, but there's more reading to do.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of opinions.
Well, so in this production, you guys had to take up these roles, and so this is not your first time through this play. And what was that like, knowing that the ending you might think of as a problem, or the whole play is a problem? Or what happened for you this time?
I had a hard time, and the first thing I went to learn to commit to memory was that final speech, because I was like, I gotta get that one in there and let it play around in my subconscious for a little bit and just tinker with it and try to understand how she ends up here. Because I was like, just reading it out loud, because I like to learn my lines and walk outside and just read them out loud. And I was like, I don't like saying this. I don't enjoy saying this. It doesn't feel good. It was having a hard time sticking because I think I had some resistance mentally to the speech. But I was like, how does a woman end up in a place where she's saying this? And I think it's hard, but I also understand, I think women watching this play now, we so relate to Kate in the beginning, especially because she's so forward and assertive and vivacious. And then you kind of see her on the opposite end of the spectrum and like, is that her arc? And so we want her arc to be different, and we're frustrated by that. But I think when you remember that the play is in the context of another setup with like Christopher Sly and like this, if you play it as true and as a farce, then we can look at it and point at it versus be in it and be confused by it. And I think we want Kate to be a perfect character, but I think Kate's journey is tragic in that she ends up somewhere where she's gone from being like herself, but within the bounds of not being a part of society, and then also now she's within marriage, and how does she navigate that? And like, what does she do to to fit in? Yeah. I think I saw a production where Kate was like much older, like she looked like she might have been 35 or older. And this idea of like, I've been waiting so long for this, and I might put on a persona of not wanting it. But everybody wants to be loved and desired. Like, everybody wants to be loved and desired. And so when you finally feel that, or you find that, then what do you sacrifice for that? How do you lose yourself in that? And I think you see Kate lose herself a bit, but there's a level of contentment that she has because she's arrived someplace that she's been kind of excluded from for so long. So then kind of empathizing with where she's at there and not expecting her to be this perfect woman who's got the feminist flag flying above her head. Like, I think she's in a new place. We may not like that place.
Yeah, I mean, that last speech is definitely complicated. Yeah. But something I like about like how, and this is, I don't know if this is on topic, but this is just from my perspective, something I really appreciate about the way you guys are playing it, is it does feel in a sense that like, Petruchio is coming from the standpoint of like, I'm not going to let your spikes, so to speak, your emotional like outrage, like disturb me at all. And that feels like, and the way it feels like you're receiving it is like, oh, that's new for me. I don't understand that because I haven't met a man who's not afraid of that. And so then then you guys meet each other, and it actually does feel like a real love story and a true love story. And I remember seeing a production of it and feeling that way too. And I feel like that's also coming out in this version that you're doing, where it feels like you guys really come to a point of like, oh, like actually this does work out. And, there's all sorts of speculation as to, what that speech is about at the end. And if she's saying that really to encourage the other women to kind of do the same, or if she's just saying that, and the theories are endless, so.
I actually, if I may, I actually didn't like my character very much either to begin with, because I am not a typical misogynist male. I don't think. I hope not. Try not to be. And I really wanted Petruchio to stand for like a male version of feminism, a male opinion in the feminist world. And so then the obvious response to that is, Alan, how in the world are you going to do that? But I think he's deeper. I think I'm deeper than that. The way I think about it is, it's like falling in love is like a game of Russian roulette. Does that make sense? You know that there's a danger between you, especially when you don't want to be falling in love. You know that there's a danger between you, and that is the gun that's loaded. And you do point it at the other person, and you pull the trigger, but you also have to point it at yourself, and you also have to pull the trigger, or else it doesn't work. The use of it as an intimidation tactic doesn't work. And that's how I think Petruchio kind of goes about things. He doesn't just point the gun at her and demand her to do things. I think there needs to be an adequate reciprocation. I think he needs to put himself through the things and show her, or even not even trying to show her anything, but like, that's the only way Russian roulette works. And I think that's the only way you fall in love, is that you have to bury yourself as well, and you have to be confident enough that you could be told no and still be a human being at the end of it. And I think, if I just may say one more thing about motive. So you said Petruchio doesn't want to let her emotional spikes keep him from getting close. I completely agree with you. But then the question of like why, other than the fact that he's an unstable person, which I don't think is true. I think a better answer to that question would be something more like, my father has just died, and I have a fair amount of emotional spikes of my own. I don't know if you've noticed.
Right.
We noticed.
Yeah. Well, it's just, it's like, so it's like when two toddlers see each other in a room full of adults. Have you ever seen that happen?
Yeah.
They're different than everybody else, and they completely notice it.
Totally.
And there's always a moment of like,
Totally.
oh wow. I think that happens. I think that's the first time I see her. It's like, oh yeah, I'm gonna do this because I want the money, and my father's died, so I have no reason to be at home. So let's have a vacation, and why not get married to a pretty girl in the process? And then they're like, oh, she's mean, and you're like, fine, I'm not worried. Then it's a man's game, right? But then she walks into the room, and it becomes everyone's game. Like, I'm just most interested. I'm sorry, I've talked so much. I'm most interested in the version of the play where Kate might end up having me say a speech at the end. And it just so happens to work out one way on the night that you came.
Yeah.
Seriously, I want to see that version of the play.
Yes.
Where Petruchio gives a speech.
That's so.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So a contest of wills where you guys are evenly matched and it just went
It is,
one
and
way
it just so happens that I
Yeah.
win because Shakespeare happened to write that. But I don't think that Petruchio needs to know that he's going to win, and I don't think that he has to believe that he's winning very often at all. Because why keep trying?
That's so true. That's so true. So the question of like taming then, like, do you then feel like, I'm always hesitant to ask an actor like, tell me what you thought or like, what's your conclusion, right? Because I do feel like we have to keep a bit of the mystery for ourselves, right? So you can answer this question whatever way you feel comfortable with. I just want to say that out front. So, but the question of like, is she tamed or is she, are they playing a game with each other, or is, you know what I mean? I think it feels like to me, like you guys have both kind of come to the conclusion of this is really real, which I love and I totally support. But I just wanted to know if you had any thoughts on that.
Taming.
You mean in the last scene specifically?
In the last scene specifically. But also I guess throughout the play, because there is all this talk of like taming and taming a woman and and also just so everyone understands, like this was written at a time when like shrew plays were incredibly popular. So Shakespeare had to write a shrew play.
It's also atypical of other shrew plays.
Yes, it is very different than other shrew plays. So there's a lot going on. If you should do some research on that.
Yeah. It's interesting in terms of that conversation. Like I was reading an essay that was talking about like Shakespeare trying to be progressive in his time because there was like ways in which you tamed a woman, tamed a shrew. And that includes like wrapping her in animal's skin and like beating her, bleeding her, or like carting her across the town and like physical things to tame someone. And so then this idea that Shakespeare's saying, no, we can kind of do some mind tricks and a little verbal abuse, which I'm still kind of like, but it's like, but he doesn't hit her. So it's like, it's kind of like the lesser of two evils, I guess. But I think in our mind, we're like, this is unacceptable. But I think if you put it in the context of like 17th century, whatever.
It's funny, you described mind tricks and what was the other one?
Verbal abuse.
Verbal abuse, because as you were forming your thought, I wanted to say, yeah, you don't have to be violent. You could just happen to fall in love together.
Yeah.
That's just funny that's our experience.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
But in terms of the taming, I think I kind of touched on it a little bit. I think wanting to be loved and desired, feeling barred from that for so long. It does feel like a game, though, even though I feel like there's some sincerity in her speech.
Yeah.
Something that Greg gave me that really helped me kind of, I guess, activate it is like that first line is, fie, unknit that threatening, unkind brow. Like she's talking directly to a woman who's got that expression on her face.
Yeah.
And it's like, ooh, this is my chance to like unravel all of you women who thought I would never end up here with this man or in this kind of arrangement. That you thought, no one ever thought that I would ever be suitable for this kind of, for marriage. So now that I am, ooh, I got y'all. You know, like, I'm like, I got you, and I'm gonna lay it out. And it's kind of like the reformed, like we were talking about, like a reformed Christian, someone who like didn't grow up in whatever religion, and then once they become it, they're almost like the main one who's kind of like, this is how you do it.
Yeah.
And I feel like she's kind of reformed in that way, or she's like, ha, I'm gonna, like, this is my vengeance. And she talks about vengeance.
Yeah.
It's like a touchstone for her against Bianca, and I think against society and women and whoever else. And I think this is her moment to be like, I gotcha. And also the game of, we're in agreement that if you call me, I will come. Like, I don't know when this conversation may have happened, but there's games being played between them the entire time from when they first meet. They play a game of words, and then they kind of like, oh, and then they have games where they decide something is what it is and isn't what it is, and they get on board with that. And so I feel like they play games, and there's a kind of camaraderie and like undercurrent, subversive, whatever, that's like, we're on the same page.
Well,
And I'm also gonna get a little, my 2 cents in.
It's exactly what you're saying. I mean, I can't think of a more uniting characteristic between our two characters than that we both like to be subversive.
Yes.
Yes.
That's what I see. If it's a game, which I agree with, I don't think it has to go any deeper than we get to laugh at everybody else and then go home.
Because everyone else is playing a game in a sense too, you know, but the
A game of identity and life.
Exactly,
Yes.
but the game they're playing is like, you know, the woman is being like coy and quiet and shy and letting the man take over, and then trying to kind of manipulate it in that way. And this is a way of seeing like, no, the woman can kind of be as strong and as opinionated as she wants to and meet another man who's that way as well, and they can kind of work it out.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I see it.
Well, and also look at physically what happens.
Yeah.
I speak so much throughout the play up until Act 5, when the line count goes way down, and then specifically in this scene, I only have a few things to say, especially once she gets in the room. I mean, you know, once we set up the wager, blah, 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 but then she comes in, and all I say is, tell them all the great things, and start with her. Nothing else. There's no, this is what I want you to say, this is how I want you to say it.
Yeah.
There's no stand there, there's no make it long, there's no make it short, there's no be funny, there's no be sad. It's tell them the things that we agreed on and start with her, go. And I think just physically giving her the microphone, it's just as big an act of love as like holding her in the room and saying, don't leave me, you know? It's just the circumstances in which they manifest are completely different.
Oh.
Well, as we know with Shakespeare, like all those things are for a reason.
It's just dawning on me, like your version of it. I hadn't thought about it.
Yeah,
Well, and all those things are for a reason whenever you're reading a Shakespeare play, right? Like word count, who's saying what when, like all of those things matter.
Yeah.
So the fact that you picked up on that is like really interesting.
Because Kate, people were like, oh, you must have a lot of lines. You're playing Kate. She doesn't talk that much. She's like around so many men who just outspeak her, talk about her while she's in the room.
Yeah.
And like she's like contained, like, and so I think that is an interesting thing that finally he's like, hey, here's your floor. I gotta read that again to see if
I know, right?
That's all it is.
so it's close to reading, but like but then she gets to have this long speech, and it's fitting because she doesn't have a speech like that's the only big speech that I learned. The rest of it is like tirades and like nitpicks, and then our wooing scene. But like she doesn't. There's scenes where she's there and she doesn't talk.
Yeah.
So the opportunity to kind of burst in a way at the end of the play is interesting too, even if we don't like all entirely what she says.
Yeah.
So Adrianna, can I circle back to the kind of the language of the problem that's got to be solved?
Yeah.
So some productions of this play will try to solve this problem, the kind of the distaste you both had initially, just like, oh, I don't like this, by creating some kind of distance. Like you're saying the words, but you don't really mean them. Like you write this kind of ironic distance. Either it's funny or it's angry or some way of saying, yeah, I got to say what's in the Shakespeare, but I'm not happy about that. Which is hard to do.
It's also a valid interpretation. It's just difficult.
Yeah, right. No, it's it's a good way to try to solve the problem. In this myShakespeare thing, right, you guys do straight Shakespeare scenes, but you also then have this kooky stuff in the interview with Sofia and I. Did you guys see that as a space to comment on your characters? I mean, were you the same person in both of those kind of scenarios, or did you feel like the studio was a place where you could kind of, I don't know, step outside or comment on? Did that work that way or no? I mean, how do you think about that?
Well, I think so, because it was like we're in paraphrase land. So then we're in the land of subtext, which people say Shakespeare doesn't have subtext, and I just don't believe it. People say what they mean, but there's more.
There's always more.
There's always more than what people actually say. So then there was an opportunity to kind of vibe or like ad-lib on what is said, and then to play, you know, in the world of it, which I'm an actor who loves improv. Like I love like working on a play and then like, can we just do this scene in our own words? And like, if it takes us an hour to get through this one scene, but we'll find all the nooks and crannies that aren't in what we actually say. So I think that's what's been really fun about the interviews, is I'm learning more about Kate, or my version of Kate, in doing them. And I kind of wish we could do them and then go back and see what that brings to the actual Shakespeare text. So I think that's a great observation, yeah.
I just have to completely 100% agree. It's the play is a playground with a certain set of like fun things to play on, and then the studio is those things disassembled, and you get to put them together how you wish, and you know, it's just fun, like exploring and learning. It's not quite like a laboratory in terms of experimenting. Like there is a script and there are things that we are to say. But the way in which the character wishes to say them is a fun thing that you can do that you can't do in the play. You just can't with Elizabethan language. It's much harder, much harder.
Yeah, 5 feet.
It's a good question.
I also think it's great that the interviewers are also able to provide some of that context as well. You know, it feels like, you know, I feel definitely that there's this affection for Kate, it feels like, from Sofia.
We have like a
you know,
relationship.
where I'm like, I'm rooting for her in this way, and I want to see her succeed. And it's really interesting because I think it also brings another context to this person, because it's also being looked at from this other person's perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah, you guys get to kind of weigh in as what would be the collective voice of the audience's conscious as they were watching the play.
Yes, exactly.
Which is cool.
Yeah. Yes,
and to get to speak directly to that and like converse with what your thoughts could be and like where you could be interpreting this moment. No, let me get you my version.
Yeah.
Let's get some definitions in there too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Bauble.
And sometimes we're honestly confused. I mean, the way that we are when we read the play, we're like, what is Kate thinking? Like, so we get to do that too. Like, we get to represent like, what's happening? Like, are you guys? Is this serious?
Yeah.
Like, we don't know either. Sometimes we're rooting for you, but we don't know.
You just said this, and
Yeah.
that means that. And now we're saying this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
You guys are ready for lunch.
I am.
Got the camera too.